And so really today that I'm here today to share a bit of my story, but I really hope to encourage others, and then hopefully you all will take this in your lives and touch the lives of others. So my journey, so it started in October, so October 24th, 2022. I was 2 days from being engaged. So my partner and I, Abdul Malik, we were celebrating, riding this high of engagement. I go to work, I come home, I go out for a walk, I take a shower, and it's there overnight. And it was one of those where it was the size of a golf ball, and so I could not miss it. But also in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, it wasn't here yesterday. I feel fine. I've had no other, no symptoms. But immediately I reflected on my grandmother's journey. And so, of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of her journey, but my human self, I go to Google. And of course, Google diagnosed me with everything. So I said, well, I'm not going to find a solution here. And so I started reaching out to doctors. It was also during the time where it was hard to get an appointment anywhere. Luckily, I was able to find an avenue where I just went through a set of referrals and ultimately ended up at the Breast Cancer Center at Alamance Regional Medical Center. So I'm thinking maybe it's just fluid because it popped up so quick and because of the size. So of course, we start with mammogram, and then the doctor comes in and says, you're going to need an ultrasound. Me not really understanding what all of this means, I'm like, okay, I'll go for an ultrasound. I'm pretty confident that, this is all good, just go through the process. But the moment that he then walked into the room after the ultrasound and he said, you're going to need a biopsy, that for me was, oh, this is real. And at that moment, I already had accepted that, okay, this is going to be a journey. And so I think going through with my grandmother during her journey, while it looked different, I was prepared. Did I know that her journey would have prepared me for mine in the moment? Absolutely not. But when I was in that room, I knew what a biopsy was, right? I knew what an ultrasound, I knew what the surgery options were, I knew the genetics test. And so I didn't have a spirit of fear because I had a level of knowledge that at least allowed me to not be comfortable with what was happening, but to possess a level of awareness that okay, well, this is gonna be a journey. So did the biopsy, and within 10 days of finding the lump, I was diagnosed November 4th. And so it was a very quick process, almost a process that is a blur and one that I was just going through the motions. But I received that phone call on November 4th, and I'm pretty sure my first phone call was to my mother. And I'm walking on the side of Elon's University. It's their homecoming, and I'm walking on the side of the street on FaceTime with my mother, telling her I have breast cancer. And then my second phone call was to my grandmother, the two most important people and women in my life. And from there, the journey started. And so November 16th, 2 days after my 25th birthday, so I was diagnosed when I was 24, 2 days after my 25th birthday, I meet with my oncologist for the first time. In between that period, I had met with a fertility specialist, so now I have to go on this journey of, do I want to freeze my eggs? I haven't even thought about marrying the man, much less having children, but now I'm faced with the question of, will I freeze my eggs to maybe have a chance at giving birth one day? But I knew that to do that was to extend the period of time that I would not receive treatment. So ultimately, I decided not to do that and to receive a shot that would essentially send me into early menopause by shutting down my ovaries. So everyone that's in menopause or has been through menopause, I feel you. I'm really upset that I have to potentially do it again one day in life, but at least I know what to expect. And so 2 days after meeting with my oncologist, at that point I did not know my staging, the journey that would be ahead, but she informed me that I had triple negative breast cancer, which is a breast cancer that is most prevalent for Black women under 40. So why have I never heard of that if I'm a Black woman under 40? And there's research to tell us that scientists and researchers, they know, and most Black women that are diagnosed, they're probably going to have triple negative. And so with that, it is also the most aggressive and fastest growing. And so at the time that I was diagnosed, I was already at stage 3. And that was essentially because of the size. During that process, I had done full body MRIs, CAT scans. It was determined that there was no other cancer in my body, just the lymph nodes and my breast. But also through the nature of it, I was informed that I would have to do 6 months of chemo, followed by a mastectomy, followed by 6.5 weeks of radiation. So those numbers just seemed like numbers until I started the journey, which she then informed me, you're actually going to start in 2 days. So I started chemo Friday, November 18th. And at the time, I did not have a port in. And so a port, for those that might not know, it is a device that's inserted through surgery, and that's how you can receive your chemo. It's just an easier access. And so I did not have a port, and so we had to do IV. And that first chemo session lasted around 5 hours. And then the day before Thanksgiving, I received my port. And so on Thanksgiving Day, I'm fresh out of port surgery, can't really move, but that's the day that I was surrounded by my family, so that was the first time that they would have seen me since I was diagnosed. But also that was the first day that I ultimately was able to make the biggest decision, or at least one of the decisions I could make in this journey, which was shaving my hair. Because my hair is thick and I did not want to deal with the shedding, but also I knew that I could rock a short haircut. So I always wanted to go bald, and never, not to say I didn't have the courage, but I always knew that I looked cute with the haircut that I had at the time. So this was really just an opportunity for me to begin to figure out how am I going to find blessings within this journey. And that was the first step that I could take. So from there, I had 6 months of chemo. It was not an easy journey because my body, it does what a body does, and it starts reacting. And so so I had 2 phases of treatment. My first phase was to run 12 weeks, so receiving weekly chemo every Monday. About a quarter of a way through, my liver numbers started to skyrocket. My white blood count was already at a 4.6, which is almost bare minimum for anybody, but by the time I had my first treatment, it was at a 3 or below. And it never got above a 4 until really January of this year. And so I was always immunocompromised. And so I had to switch regimens and go bi-weekly, but going through it bi-weekly, of course, allowed my body more time to recover, but I had to receive higher doses each time. And then I had to follow treatment with a shot to bring my white blood count up, to then have chemo the next week. So ARMC and the nurses, we became real good friends. I saw them 4 days out of 5, but I was also able in some way to create a community there. Also at the time, COVID, there were no visitors. And so when I walked into that treatment room, it was just me and God and all the electronics and books that I would bring. And so when I reflect back, and even during that moment, it was one where, yes, I was lonely, but I was never alone. And it was a time for me to really sit with myself, to sit with God, but also to do something so mindless as to watch TV. Or to look out the window, and everyone that was there, we were all on a very different journey, but we were all on the same journey when it came to that treatment room. And so I finished out that phase, and then I had a ultrasound in March. So this was the halfway mark. By the time I had my 3rd chemo, the lump, I could not feel it. Like I said, it had never hurt. I never had any symptoms, but I could never feel it after that 3rd chemo. And so when I went for the ultrasound, I'm laying on the bed, and they have a great room in the sense of it has like a picture where you can see, it's not outside, but it is painted like the sky, flowers. And so I'm looking up, and I'm like, okay, God, we're going to have a miracle today. And so it's really quiet, and she's are praying for me on my behalf in ways and in rooms that I will never step in. And so she goes out and the doctor comes in and they say, well, we can't find anything. And I said, I know. She said, we can't find anything. And I said, yes, I pray for a miracle. And the doctor said, well, you have received one. But it's on the back of my mind, like, okay, maybe I don't have to do the other chemo. No, my oncologist was like, you're continuing with treatment because it was the nature of it. And there's only so much that you can see on a scan. They said, just in case, you're going to continue with your treatment. And so also, I was okay with that because that was in the original plan. And so I said, don't let me put my opinions, my feelings on someone that went to school for this. And yes, God is the ultimate healer, but also a firm believer that He put the medical professionals in my path to do their job in ways that I did not even understand what they were talking about, but I had to fully trust. And as a Black woman going through the medical system, it's hard because oftentimes we're not listened to. But I knew at this moment who I had on my medical team that they were going to listen to me. And so I trusted their plan because I felt that it was ordained by God. And so I went on to my second treatment, and that was the treatment that felt more like your typical chemo. And so the first chemo, I was able to drive myself some weeks, and in some way that was for me to know like you are still living, right? Life doesn't just stop, so you have to keep going. And a lot of the battle is a mental battle, right? And so yes, there was physical elements, but it was a mental battle. So me being able to drive myself, that was just one way that I could prove like you are going to make it to the other side. But on the other, in another format, it was one way to protect those that I love, right? And so I knew that going into certain spaces can be triggering for folks in ways that maybe they don't even know can trigger them. Because when you haven't explored something in your past, and I can speak to my husband who lost his father at 12, who had cancer. He was 12. The way that his brain and his emotions work now is not what it was at 12. And so him going into certain spaces, but also being faced with his partner having cancer was probably a trigger. And so any way that I could protect my loved ones, I wanted to do so. And so sometimes if I could drive myself, that was the least that I could do. And so that second phase, completely different. Could not drive myself because it was one chemo that it hit instantly. And that was the chemo that I experienced, your typical symptoms that you hear about. But it also in some way, maybe it was my age, maybe it was because I was the healthiest I had been before the diagnosis, that it was hard, but I knew that I was going to make it. But I won't sit here and say that there were some days that I didn't just sit there and think, wow, am I really going to get through this, right? Like, I feel so bad. I'm always feeling bad. Like, yes, some days I feel good, but man, I have so much more the journey to go. And so there were times where, as much as I wanted to be joyful and to know that I was going to be okay, and in my right mind, I knew that I was going to be okay. I'm just going to blame it on the drugs. I was high a lot of the time. And in some way, that was a cool part about the Benadryl, y'all. When you have Benadryl, go straight to your. I was just sitting there on FaceTime or pictures with my mom, like, yeah, girl. But in my right mind, I knew that I was going to be okay, but life is real, and we are human, and we feel what we feel, and there were times where, like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this. And then there was days where I just wanted to be alone. There were days where nobody knows the conversations or what I was going through but me and God. But those were also the times where I was able to get real with myself and come to terms with some things that I just felt like I may not want to communicate to other people, not because it was a secret, but I certainly didn't want to be responsible for putting, my feelings onto someone else that may also, and I think oftentimes, like, yes, I'm going through it, but my loved ones are going through it it too, right? And so I wanted to protect them as much as I could. And so I finished, and I was all right. And then at that point, we then began to talk about surgery options. So what did I say that I was going to have in the beginning based off of the diagnosis? But God. So because the chemo had worked so well, I was given the choice to do a lumpectomy. Because they said we cannot find anything. It is not in your lymph nodes. And they really could only see like a surrounding tissue. But they said you can actually opt to do a lumpectomy with a bilateral breast reduction. Also another blessing. I always wanted a breast lift. My grandmother always told me that my boobies weren't the way they were because I wore a sports bra. I don't think that is true. But I knew that my boobies probably should not look like this at 23 years old. And so I was like, okay, well, I can get a breast lift. Cool. So let's go with that option. And so I opted to do a lumpectomy with a bilateral breast reduction because I didn't want them lopsided. And so I did the surgery. When they did the surgery, there was no evidence of any cancer within the lymph nodes or the tissue. So I had a couple of days of healing, and that was an adjustment for me. I couldn't use my arms. I had to sleep upright. It certainly was a mental battle in just a different physical way. But I knew that I would make it. And so a couple weeks later, I began radiation. And so at the beginning, I thought I would only have about 28 sessions. Well, ultimately, it turned into 35 sessions, which was 6.5 weeks. So you go Monday through Friday, every day. And that was another battle in and of itself. Not only because I'm very frugal and I like to save my gas, and so I'm having to drive every day. Having to drive every day, but just going, driving 25 minutes, you're going in. It only lasts for about 10 minutes, and now I have to drive another 25 minutes home. So I didn't feel like I could justify going every day, but that's what they told me I had to do. So 6.5 weeks, I did radiation, and it was all right, but also, like I said, going through it with my grandmother, I knew what was going to happen. I also knew that I would be different, not to put you on the spot. I also knew that I would be different in a way that I was going to follow the rules. And so my grandmother did not always follow the rules. What the doctor told her to do, they took on the cream. But I was like, no, I am going to do it so much where I'm going to have my arm like this. I'm going to have it creamed up. And so it was good for about 4 weeks until they did the increased radiation, which was basically like the double. And that's when, realistically, from Friday to Saturday, I woke up and the skin was gone. And but almost as quick as it was gone, that's as quick as it came back. And so that was just yet another opportunity for me to really realize how amazing our bodies are, how resilient they are, but also in order for them to be resilient, we have to take care of them. So at this time, I'm making sure that I'm eating well, I'm still exercising, so I'm still keeping my body as whole as it can be, even though I knew that it was in a season of where it was not whole. And so I had surgery, I had radiation, I still had immunotherapy. So the journey still is not over because of the nature of it. My oncologist research says that there are maybe some cells that you can't detect, but there is immunotherapy that will help target those cells. It's definitely not as harsh as chemo, but I had to do an additional 8 sessions of that. And so that was every 3 weeks. But for me, that was easy. I would go in. I didn't have to receive any steroids, so I wasn't high as much. But my time definitely increased while I was there. But I was still able to then begin to think about, okay, the journey is almost over, but to prepare myself. Because I think if I just had ended right at surgery, there would have been a moment of what is next. but I kind of phased through it by going through the immunotherapy. Actually having my last session December 28th of 2023. And so I'm a year into the process at this point. And then January 16th, I was able to have my port removed. And for me, that was the ultimate sign that the journey has been completed. I didn't mind the port in the sense of it didn't hurt, but it was a constant reminder that like you are still in this journey. And it was really just annoying at some points because I love to be active, and I couldn't run the way I wanted to because there was always a tugging. But at the same time, I was recovering from surgery, and so my mobility was limited. I couldn't even stretch my arm out like this. And so at 25, someone who's always been active, to have their life changed upside down, but now to not have their mobility, it was a process that I had to really just put my faith in my body again, but also do the work. And so that journey ended on January 16th, but the journey really continues. I mean, I think oftentimes you hear people going through it, but oftentimes we don't talk about one, their loved ones, but we also don't talk about life after. And in some ways, that's really the hardest part. Because now, especially when at 24, I never, not to say that I thought I was exempt, but I never thought it would happen to me. So what's to say that it can't happen again, right? And so, I do have annual mammograms, annual MRIs, but when I was going through treatment, I knew that I was doing something that was directly attacking it. If I'm no longer receiving chemo, what if it just starts growing and I won't know, right? Because I felt fine, before it happened. And so that's been a mental battle that I would love for folks to talk about a little bit more, because not only is it this sense of survivor's guilt, which is one of like, wow, I made it. And it's not to say that I'm sad that I made it, but you know that a lot of people don't make it. Especially when I was diagnosed and I heard of so many people that had dealt with breast cancer before. Folks that I never imagined, like, oh my God, you went through it too? And so that was a moment of, I made it, but also my loved ones still have to deal with what I went through, and they're on their own journey. And so that was a part of the journey of survival's gift, but it's also, like I said, in the back of my mind, what if something else happens? Will my body respond in the way? Will I respond in the way? Of course, I can't live in that spirit of fear. I do what I can do. God has to do the rest of it. But I know what I can do is to go out and spread awareness, right? To tell my testimony. I always said, I was okay with my testimony before this happened. I know that we all go through things in life, and I know at 24, my life could have been a lot different, but it also was beautiful in the way that it was. And so I was okay with the testimony, though. God said that He was not done, and so I knew that if I'm going to go through this, He is not going to allow me not to share this, right? Like He is in no way going to let this beautiful man engage to me, and then we don't get to live life together, right? Like that just did not make sense to me. But also, that propelled me. But I just knew, God, you are not going to let me be the one that puts a level of hurt on specifically my mother and my grandmother and my partner, right? So that is what allowed me to fight so hard. Like, I was not only fighting for my life, but I'm fighting to protect them. And so this journey afterwards, yes, there's a bit of, I don't even want to say fear. But of course, there are days where I'm like, I feel something. But do I really? Is it my mind? Oh, I have a little tink. Well, it's because you're regaining feeling. And so I have to realize, like, Sydney, your body is still healing, and a lot of those things are just natural. If you have your period, your boobs are gonna hurt. Like it's not just cancer, right? And by the grace of God, I got off of the Lupron shot and my ovaries started working again, so I was no longer in menopause. because people donated to me, and folks that I have never had the pleasure of meeting and probably won't. But I had people praying for me in rooms that I would never walk in. But the way that my family and my friends surrounded me, that's really what sustained me, but my faith is what propelled me through this journey.
Amen.
And so now it's really, okay, how am I going to use this testimony? And it's speaking with folks, right? It's speaking with young folks, but it's also speaking with women that maybe you have your mammogram that has been scheduled and you keep putting it off. I promise you, it's all right. And I think sometimes when we know that there's a chance of something, it's the fear that stops us, right? So it's the fear of, what if I go to that appointment and I'm like somebody I know, right? And so sometimes that fear is what stops us. But it don't hurt too much. It's just a little pinch. But I promise you, the going to the appointment, keeping the scheduled appointment, making sure you're going each year, that is going to be a lot better than dealing with the unknown.
Yes.
Because I promise you, if anything was for you, I'm a firm believer that God is going to sustain you through that, and that we have a community here that will also keep you. And so it's now my journey is going out and advocating, and it's sharing it with anyone that wants to listen, because I know that if one person is going to be impacted by my journey, then that is a job well done. I did my assignment, I completed my assignment, but there's still work to do. And so I think also therapy is next, and that is just yet another opportunity where I'm an open book, and so if I know that I'm struggling with these things because I'm human, there are also people in professions that will help me. And so this journey has been one of, yes, my ability, my body's ability, my spirit's ability, my mind's ability, but it's also like, Sydney, you have to trust the people, you have to trust the plan, and you have to trust what God has ordained for you, because this is what is going to be necessary to get you to that finish line. And so early on in the journey, my grandmother sent me something that says, I am the storm. And so that is what propelled me through that journey. I am the storm. And so now I have a bracelet that you all wouldn't be able to see what it says, but when I take it off and look at it, on the inside it says, I am the storm. And so this is, I like to usually have my messages tattooed on my body, because that's my creative outlet, but this is an everyday reminder that, I really am the storm. And nothing too big or too small can defeat me as long as my spirit stays in that. Because flesh is flesh, but my spirit is what is going to get me through a lot of those hard trials. So I know that my journey is not over. I'm 26. And so I pray that I have a lifelong, ahead of me, but also I know what with life comes challenges. And so I'm not exempt from it, but I do believe that I have learned an essential lesson at 25 that most people may never learn. And I'm confident that that is going to sustain me throughout my life. And so that is my testimony, that is my story. It hasn't been easy, but it was worth it, because I know that it not only changed my life and allowed me to be selfish in a way where I always had a hard time not receiving love, but to feel like I deserved the love that I received, because I received it in a way that just felt like, oh my God, this is just, like my heart is full. I don't deserve this, right? But I very much learned through that journey, like, Sydney, you deserve this. And also, you are very strong, but you need people and you need a village to help sustain you through this journey, right? And so you have to lean on those that want to. And also, in some way, when you are going through this, and then as a caretaker, there's not a lot that you can do. And so who am I to block a blessing for someone that wants to care for me? And that may just be the way that they are able to cope with this situation, because they can't heal my body. They can't get the chemo for me. They can't take the cancer away from me, but they can give me a meal. They can take me to chemo. They can pray for me. They could just sit there while I cry and talk. And there were multiple times where my mother, she would take me to have to talk about anything, or I would just talk to her every day. Y'all, there were times where my grandmother came all the way to Memphis. Y'all know she stays in one of those. But when this woman went out and got a GPS to make sure that she could get to her baby, that was yet another way of like, God, you have already made sure that you have preparations in place for me to go through this, right? And so lean on your village in whatever way you are experiencing a challenge, whether that's cancer or sickness, or you're just having a bad day, because those happen. But don't allow those bad days to outweigh the good. And know that as long as you keep your faith and your spirit at the forefront, it won't be easy, but that's what is going to propel you to at least make it to the next day. And as long as we can just get to the next day, we have the chance to get to the next day after this. That is my story. I appreciate you all listening. Like I said, I'm an open book, so if you have any questions, there's no questions that are off limits.